coming to the United States. So we're going to have Catherine just kick us off with an overview.
Okay, so in the United States, there are over 4,500 universities, and they're arranged. There are small, there are large, they're what are called public, there are private. And so we're going to talk about public universities, which are oftentimes also known as state universities. And the reason that is they typically have a few criteria. One is that they have a connection with the state government. So either depending on the way the state is organized, they might have an overseeing board, or there'd be very close contact with the way in which the university establishes its own mission for its education. The funding model is another thing, and that's also linked to the state. So in the states, there are 50 nifty states in the United States. People pay a state tax as well as a federal tax and a local tax. That state tax contributes some funding towards the state public universities in that state, which means that students who are from that state and reside in that state pay less tuition than somebody who's from out of state, or that would also be inclusive of an international student. So their funding model is a little bit different. As a result, however, we typically tend to be less expensive compared to the private universities, and sometimes by quite a significant, sometimes 50% or more less expensive. And while there are exceptions to my next and last point, we tend to be, as public universities, mid-size to large. What does that mean? 12,000 up to 60,000 students, depending. So that's something to think about. Whereas the private universities they can tend to be any size, but they can also tend to be really small, like 1,000 students. You would not find that usually ever at a public university. So Molly, I think I covered that. You're going to hit the benefits, because we both work for public universities. We both love them, and we can sing their praises till all day long. So Molly, over to you.
All right, so some of the benefits of considering a public university, particularly one that focuses on research, because there are different models that are being used within the United States. And so a research university tends to be one that goes all the way up through PhD programming. So they wouldn't just be offering undergraduate bachelor degree seeking programs, but more than that as well. So there's these opportunities as a result of that to be able to conduct original research with world-class professors. That happens because we have these graduate programs that are focusing on research and PhD programs. There's oftentimes more research to be done than can be done by our graduate students. So we're oftentimes tapping our undergraduate students to be able to help with those research opportunities. Another benefit to being at a public research institution is that there's this ability to balance both your rigorous academics along with your campus life and activities. So think about this as, yes, you have that access to that engaging academic experience that you're looking for, but what's really great about coming to the United States is you're able to do more than just your academics. You are able to do those club sports or participate in sports opportunities, engage in student club opportunities. When you're looking at a public research university, these clubs and sports opportunities tend to be in the hundreds. So it's really easy to be able to build community on our college campuses. Now, this might revolve around academic opportunities, yes, or sports, but there's also cultural, political, spiritual opportunities as well. So there's really this vast array of opportunities on campuses like ours. In addition to that, as you're thinking about your academic experience, you may also see these professional schools like in engineering, pharmacy, performing arts, business. Within a larger university context, it's not unusual for students to be able to pursue this professional degree program where you're doing maybe a very focused degree, or you can also think about multiple different opportunities to explore what you want to study, as undecided is also one of the most popular majors of incoming students. It really allows students this opportunity because there's so many programs that are available on a public research university campus to be able not just to explore, but then once you have decided, or if you already know what you want to do, you can also have that opportunity to double major or double minor if you want to bring in multiple areas of interest. There may also be opportunities to do not just advanced research, but also advanced studies as well. A lot of public research universities have honors colleges that are available, or they may offer programs with honors in addition to that. So might be doing independent research on your own, not just assisting a professor, but also doing unique independent research. But it's this opportunity to take your academics to the next level as well. And then finally, there's also this really high standard for academic quality on our campuses. Because there's this interest in research and providing groundbreaking intellectual advancement, you're going to find just a really advanced setting for academics on our college campuses. So I'm going to those are some of the benefits that exist at our public research universities, and I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to think about the shadow side of this. So what are some of the downsides?
Well, I think, thank you, Molly. And I think you did a fabulous job hitting all those highlights, of which there are many. But one of the downsides, and it's true, if you're talking about a large university with lots of people, some people are going to say, hey, this just feels too big. It's too big. I'm going to be lost in a sea of people, and that's not for me. And so you're going to have to ask yourself that. You're going to have to trust your heart on that one. But one thing to also think about is what exactly is the ratio of students to professors? So I'm going to have Molly answer this as well, but at Rutgers, where we have about 35,000 undergraduates, I'm not including the graduate and the doctoral students on that number, but 35,000 undergraduates on our New Brunswick campus, the student to professor ratio is about 14 students to every professor. And again, these are professors who are doing cutting edge research linked to professional organizations or the industry, depending on what they're doing. So you've got more intimacy than it feels, and I think that's something to make sure when you're doing your search that you're looking. Molly, what's your ratio?
Oh, it's very similar, Catherine. It's 16 to 1 as well.
There we go. So what I want you to really leave you with in terms of the downside, because that's the only thing I ever hear from students who's like, "Ooh, that feels a little bit too big for me." So I want to just let you think about this. You can always make a big community feel small, but you can never make a small community feel big. So depending on which side of that saying feels really truer to your heart, pay attention to that one. Okay. And that's how you're going to start to find the place that feels like a good match. So yeah, I think arguably that's probably one of the downsides. It might feel a little too big for some people. But then again, that can be a real advantage. So we're going to talk a little bit about the application process. Molly is more of an expert on that than I am. So I'm going to let her talk about that. And then we're going to get you all set for how to go through this fair and get the information that you need about finding the right fit. So Molly, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Now, the application process for US universities, for those of you who have started to look at this process or have started to engage in the process, it is or can be a little overwhelming. There's so many things that different universities ask for. We're all unique and beautiful butterflies, but on a public research university side, we tend to have a little more streamlined processes because we're processing tens of thousands of application. So you heard Catherine say at Rutgers, it's 35,000 undergraduate students. You can imagine what the first year class size must be. How many students, do you know, Catherine, how many students come in as first year students?
About, I think, just under 7,000.
So just think about that. 7,000 means they have to admit more than 7,000 people in order to land at 7,000. That means, again, tens of thousands of applications that they're processing and reviewing and trying to figure out, can they be successful on our campus and fit in? So the application process tends to be a little bit more streamlined for public research universities. We're going to ask you to fill out, yes, an application, common application, coalition application. Sometimes there is a university specific application. Use whatever you feel is right for you. The one thing I love about the common application is that it's used for hundreds of institutions in the US and abroad. So you can fill it out once and then just do the university specific sections for the institutions you're considering. The nice thing about what happens after that, it is generally a holistic approach to the review process, but we are looking first and foremost at how, if you can do the academic work here. So your grades in your classes, the scores you've earned, the marks that exist on your marking sheets, those are the things we're looking at really closely. You do not need to know what you want to study when you're applying. You don't need to know what you want to study when you start with us. The whole idea of coming to the US is that ability to explore and understand all programs are open to you. And then the last thing that you might be thinking about is, what does this testing look like? You've heard a lot about the SAT or maybe even the ECT. Almost all institutions in the United States have gone test optional because of the pandemic, but if you are choosing and have ability to take the SAT or ECT, um, just know that those might be absolutely required for some of our most selective institutions in the United States, and may also require testing to be considered for scholarships. That being said, don't feel like you need to do it. There are thousands of institutions now that are test optional in the United States, so you can consider looking at most institutions without testing. I did touch very, very briefly on funding, and we won't have a chance to go over everything related to funding, but I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to kind of wrap things up for us.
Okay. Do you want me to mention anything about funding, or do we want to just see if there are any questions after we conclude? Molly.
Let's see what comes out of the questions. I'm sure there
Okay.
might be
Right.
something that comes up about funding.
All right, so we'll table that one for now. If you all have questions, we'll linger longer and answer those. I think the big thing, though, is for all of you to think about how to decide what's the right place for you if you're going to come to the States, because there's a great variety. It's not just that there's 50 states, there's 6 time zones in the United States if you include Hawaii. So you've got different climates. You've got different places that are urban, rural, suburban. You've got big places, small places, north, south, places that have snow, places that never have snow. So you need to kind of think about what it is that you're wanting, not just what you want to study. And I think as you find that right fit, I want to advise you some of the best questions that have ever been asked of people like us. And I share with this because this is how you find out the right place for you. Because if you say things like, well, what are your, do you offer this as a major? That doesn't tell you anything. If you say, I mean, it does, but it's not something you can't look up. And if you say, oh, can you tell me, is it easy to fly there? That's something you can look up. So the best question for people like us is to say something like, tell me something about your university that I couldn't find on Google. And then pay attention to the answer that people in admissions like us give you on that one, because that will tell you everything. Another great question might be, describe the character of the student on campus, on your campus. Tell me about what students are like on campus, or why do you like working there, or just something that gets a little bit under the skin as opposed to the obvious questions that oftentimes guidance counselors are going to tell you to ask, but they're going to just give you the same. Everybody's going to give you something that's not going to make your heart sing, and you want that thing that's going to tell you, wow, I never knew that. And you would maybe find it out if you could step foot on campus. These are weird virtual times right now. However, being international students, it's not so easy to go and do the grand college tour in the United States. So with that in mind, ask us those sorts of really hard questions and think about how we compare and differ with one another on all of those above things, and figure out where you want to go that makes you the absolute, it just makes your heart sing, because that in the end is what you want, because that's where you're going to really excel, and that's where you're going to do well. Okay, so that's my unsolicited advice on that. Molly, do you want to add anything to that?
No, but enjoy this opportunity to ask questions, and we're happy to answer anything you would like to learn more about. Feel free to either come on the microphone or use the chat, and we're happy to respond that way. So what questions do you have?
What?
Great question. So Nicholas has a question regarding to what do the fees look like for US citizens living abroad? Catherine, did you want to take this?
Well, I was going to say, when we talked a little bit earlier about how the state universities and the public universities are linked to the states. So at Rutgers, for example, the fees are no different for being an international student, a US citizen, somebody from Alaska. If you are not a resident of the state of New Jersey, you pay out of state fees. Now, that's different in different states, and different states have different residency requirements. So the answer is there's no simple answer on that at all. There's no one answer. There's probably 50 answers, and everything is going to be prefaced with the, well, it depends. And so it does depend upon where you're likely to go. Now, the thing about US citizens living abroad is that regardless of that first bit I said, there might be extra scholarships and funding available because of US opportunities for its own citizens. So that might differ a little bit. But yeah, Nicholas, you're going to need to check with each university. So I'll let you know. Rutgers in New Jersey residency, next to impossible to get. Doesn't matter if you are a US citizen, you're not a resident in New Jersey, you're paying out of state fees. There you go. Molly, do you want to quickly answer Nicholas's on that one as well for Vermont?
Yeah, very similar. Vermont is a tourist destination in the United States, so we have very strict rules around who gets in-state versus out-of-state tuition. So all of our US citizens abroad, unless they really have no other residence within the United States other than Vermont, they are very likely going to be listed as out-of-state residents. And that's pretty normal for a lot of state institutions, unless you do have ties to that state in some way. And so if you have ties to a state, whether it's residency or like you own a home there, um, having family there isn't enough usually. It's usually tied to some sort of taxation that you're paying to that state. So without paying a tax to the state, it's really hard to get in-state tuition. That's there's always the exception to the rule. So that becomes important, as Catherine said, and as Nicholas, you pointed out, it's good to check with each institution. There is another question related to scholarships. And Catherine, do you want to kick off what happens for your institution?
Sure. So for international students, scholarships are merit-based, and they're not huge, but they are renewable, which means that if you maintain a certain standard academically, you will get that money every year. And that's an important thing. So as you all go through, do you offer scholarships, and finding out what the size of scholarships, do the mathematical calculations on this, because some scholarships will sound really generous, but they might just be for 1 year rather than over the 4 years. Some scholarships, they'll tell you the sound, and then they'll say something like over 4 years, as opposed to what the actual amount is each semester. So you need to listen carefully, take notes, and find out what's behind those scholarships. So I guess this leads a little bit into the funding, and I think it's important to say international students, your visas in the US allow you to work on campus as well. And on campus jobs are great because they're on campus, people understand your life as a student, and they're oftentimes designed to develop your skill sets for future employment anyway. So for example, I'm running the student center. I'm going to look at a name here, Gabrielle. I might hire Gabrielle to work in the student center, and Gabrielle might in fact be doing not much that first year because I need to find out how talented she is and how smart and capable she is. But by the end of the fourth year, she's probably running the place and understands the budgets and understands how to put that together. So there's a whole skill set that comes there as well. So with that in mind, there are lots of ways in which students fund their education, and that is part of it for international students. There's merit-based scholarships, and then there's also oftentimes on-campus jobs. And those on-campus jobs can be linked with your research that we talked about earlier, and they can also be linked with something called resident assistant. And this is a sweet role. So for example, at Rutgers, we house 18,000 students. If you are selected as a resident assistant, your room and board is your compensation. So a huge amount of your overall bill goes away. So these are the kinds of things to keep a little spreadsheet as you compare your institutions that you're interested. Look at the prices, look at ways in which you can have a reduce in cost and go forward. So long answer to the question about scholarships, but that I think it's some important other things. And there's also having credits come in early if you're an IB student or A levels and things like that. Molly, anything you want to add to that?
I would just rename that merit scholarships are the most common form of funding for public institutions. And some of them are done automatically at the point of applying, and some of them you need to watch out for deadlines. Deadlines are very strict around scholarships. So if there is a date tied to an application for funding, then make sure you get it done before then, because it is very strict with the timeline. Hello, what is the share of international students usually? I'm just wondering, how is it more difficult for a student who's coming from outside of the US? Typically with public universities, the international populations are a smaller percent. Even in the United States, with private institutions, the most it's going to go up to is about 25% of our total enrollment. But what's unique about a public school, as Catherine mentioned earlier, is this focus on our local population first and foremost. So the state of Vermont or the state of New Jersey residents are always going to have a preference with enrollment. That being said, Izzy, almost all US institutions really, really, really want international students on our campus. So you are always going to be a special population that we're going to give special priority to. We are going to look first and foremost to make sure that you can do the work. And if you are, it's more often than not, you're going to be offered a spot because we really want you on our campuses. Catherine, anything you would add to that?
I think the part I want to add to is the first part of the question is what's the share of international students? Again, this is a little bit of insider insight as you all go around and ask admissions reps various questions, because at many institutions, that statistic, that number is based on the number of visas that are issued rather than necessarily the country that somebody grew up in. So if you are a US passport holder, but you've never stepped foot in the United States, you might not be statistically counted as an international student. And so it's misleading. So again, the question I would encourage you all to say is to ask about, like, can you describe the diversity on campus? How many first generation students are there? How many students come from other countries? And jettison the word international when you're trying to get a picture of what a campus looks like. And don't be afraid to keep saying, "Oh, can you tell me a little bit more? Can you tell me a little bit more?" Because I think we've all fall into trying to put our best foot forward all the time, which isn't necessarily always going to tell you the full picture. And so just be seasoned shoppers. You're not going to just buy a pair of jeans off the shelf because the waist and the inseam is what you normally buy. You're going to put them on and see if they fit and where the pocket placement is, and do they hit your ankles at the right place, and do they taper in the way you want, or do they flare in the way you want. So it's the same thing as buying clothes, a little more complicated, but that you're going to be as discerning. So Molly, would you add anything more to that one, or
Oh, that was great.
other questions for us? Timeline for application.
Yes, timeline is my expertise. As I do also, in addition to events like this, I also review and process applications. If you're heading into your 12th year, your final year of high schooling, your final year of secondary schooling, typically you want to be starting an application as early as August. So right now, the application is open for almost all institutions in the United States for students that are finishing their final year this year. A lot, depending on if you're looking at East Coast or West Coast, but East Coast and even still across the United States, most of us with early application deadlines are going to have right around a November 1st deadline. And that would mean we're looking for your application, your school marks, any other supplemental documents we're going to ask for you will need to be done by November 1st. Then there's also typically a later deadline. Maybe it's in January for the West Coast. Often schools are looking even later, where you might have a March deadline, but they turn around decisions very quickly then, and they often have scholarship deadlines that are sooner. So typically the best time to be applying for US universities is right now, September, October, to get it done early and know that you don't have to worry about it later on. If there are some later deadlines, say it's in January or in March, it's still nice to be able to complete your application now and then start to send off supplemental documents, anything else that needs to be sent in a little closer to that deadline. Pay very, very close attention to deadlines. Again, I can't stress this enough. If you submit something one day late, it might mean you're not eligible for admission. It might mean you're not eligible for scholarship. So pay very close attention to those dates and deadlines.
Yeah. Make a spreadsheet. If you're applying to, say, 5 different institutions in the US, make a spreadsheet. What kind of application? What are the deadlines? Do they need an essay? Do they need 3 essays? Do you know, like all this sort of stuff, and just make a spreadsheet so you know exactly what's going on. And if essays are required, make sure that you read them aloud. Don't have somebody else write them. You write them. But read them aloud, and when you read aloud, because I like to write, when I read something aloud that I've written, I can really tell where I'm not making sense. When I just read it quietly in my head, I'm like, I'm a genius. But when I have to read it out loud, I'm like, ooh, oops, need to clarify that. That doesn't make sense. So do that. Read it to a friend, read it to your dog, read it to a wall, but read it out loud and get feedback that way as well. So, other questions for us? Well, enjoy the rest of your fair. You've been a lovely audience. Thank you ever so much. And if you have questions, visit our booths and we'll follow up with more information for you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Okay, that went well.
Yeah. How do we stop the recording?
I think we just exit.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Catherine. It was so much fun.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. And I'll catch you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.